Hello everyone and welcome to episode 17 of the SATO Briefing series. Today we are talking about the F7F Tigercat. You can see right here in front of me I have one of the versions that I'm currently working on. I shouldn't say versions, it's one of the several liveries. The F7F Tigercats were a pretty cool air tanker. You didn't see them, I feel, very often. They seem to be overshadowed by some of the other tankers over the years, like the TBM Avenger, which really served longer than the Tigercat did, and other aircraft like the S2, which actually replaced the Tigercat. So the Tigercats, all of the tanker versions, I believe, were the Dash 3 variant. And really all the versions kind of are similar except for the Dash 4, which was slightly different. I'm not exactly sure what about it was so different than the others. I've seen others with other pictures of versions of the Tigercat with aerodynamic shrouds over the propeller assemblies and things like that to help aid in speed and cooling the R2800s that the Tigercat has. Now, being that the Tigercat is very well powered, it was a very fast aircraft without the tank on it. I believe the Tigercat would have been one of the fastest propeller-driven fighters that would have operated had the Tigercat actually entered World War II sooner. But it entered service towards the end of the, basically right at the end of the war, and never really saw combat. It did see limited use as a night fighter, I think, in Korea, but later on they were turning to tankers. So, being that they're well over 2,000 horsepower in each engine on the Tigercat, they were still fast even with an external tank on them. And the Tigercats, as far as I'm aware, there are several operators of them, but as far as I'm aware, they all had this similar conformal style retardant tank on them, as you see in this picture here, or this video here. They varied in size between 800 gallons and 1,000 gallon tanks. The ones that we have here are 1,000 gallons, so they do hang quite low to the ground. There is not much ground clearance with the Tigercat. With this 1,000 gallon tank on them, so you had to be extremely careful whenever coming into land with these in certain weight settings, and on takeoff and things like that. There's, like I said, hardly any ground clearance. So the Tigercats, I believe, from what I've seen reference to, their maximum operating weight as a tanker was about 28,000 pounds. So I think it's significantly heavier than the traditional load that they would be flying with as a fighter, a traditional fighter. And interestingly enough, some interviews with former tanker pilots that actually flew the Tigercat said that, at least with TBM, unlike a lot of other air tankers, when they're converted from their wartime trim, essentially, a lot of their components inside that are not dealing with firefighting is basically stripped, so the plane is super light. But the TBM Tigercats, and I'm assuming some of the other Tigercats were probably the same way, actually kept the armor plating inside them. So that's a rather interesting point about the Tigercats, is that despite having basically just their wartime armaments, weapon systems, and unused radio equipment and wiring taken out, they're essentially almost as they were when they were in military service, which is kind of interesting. So like some of these other interviews, the Tigercats, like I said, were extremely fast. I believe they could be. I think their top speed was in excess of 400 knots, which for a propeller-driven aircraft is pretty fast. So that's about 460 miles per hour. So it's faster than the Mustang or the Corsair or any of those other aircraft. The only aircraft that was similar in its speed category was the F8F Bearcat. So, being that this is a twin, it was, I mean, it was just super well powered, and it was a pretty good tanker platform from what I've heard it described as. And they're super aerodynamic. I mean, if you look at a Tigercat from the nose on, I mean, if you could imagine it without the tank on it, it has a very low profile for air in terms of aerodynamic drag and things like that. So it's really not that surprising they're that fast. But even with the tank on them, they could still fly in excess of 350 knots, I think it was, or 320 knots. So apparently, one of the tanker pilots that I remember hearing talk about the Tigercat said that the lead test pilot for Grumman basically told them that the Tigercat could fly faster than their stated speed, but they found that at higher speeds that the control surfaces had supersonic compression problems. So basically the airflow going over the wings at high speeds, the airflow is basically going supersonic and would compress the controls enough to where you couldn't really move them. This is another common problem with the P-38 Lightning in a dive, where the P-38 could actually break the sound barrier in a dive or get very close to it. I've heard some instances saying that they could actually break the sound barrier, but the Tigercat had this same issue because of how fast it could go. So the lead test pilot basically told the tanker pilots when they were doing the weights and adjustments for things to basically keep the planes well under 460 miles per hour, even though they could probably fly faster than that because of that problem. So that is a very interesting thing. If some people know, the Tigercats have been actually raced at Reno, and they're pretty fast. So I've had the opportunity to see Tigercats fly in person at Plains of Fame in California, and one of them that was actually flying was actually a former TBM Tigercat. And I think, I could be mistaken, but almost every flying Tigercat currently flying in the world used to be a tanker, and that's the only reason why they're still flying. So it's pretty interesting. But the Tigercat, I believe they flew from the late 1950s, I think it was, into the mid 70s or so, and they were slowly phased out for the S2 Tracker, another Grumman product. So, and everyone I think that's familiar with fire aviation, they know the S2 Tracker. It was kind of like one of the longest serving tanker aircraft around for the longest time. I mean, the state of California flew the S2A up until the early 2000s. That the old radial S2As, they flew to the early 2000s with them, and then they converted their entire fleet to the turbine-powered S2Ts, or basically is based off the S2F. But the Tigercats were like the first kind of widely used twin in that respect, like it was initial attack aircraft. The other ones that are popular that you probably know is like the A-26 or B-26. A lot of them were used as well, but the Tigercat was kind of really the first in that type of realm of, small light or, initial attack aircraft. So small, fast, and had a decent, capacity for retardant. So like I said, these were between 800 and 1,000 gallons. So it would just, and like I said, it would just depend on the operator of them. But like I said, the version that we have here is actually the 1,000-gallon tank version. So I was getting into what I've actually had done to these. So Milton Shupe is the original creator of these Tigercats, and I personally love the Tigercat, and that he came out with the tanker versions for, I believe, as far back as for FS9. And then they were, brought forward. It was obviously compatible with FSX and stuff like that. And then there was a project on Sim Outhouse to try and modernize them to bring them to P3D. Now, it was done, but only the military versions were brought to P3D. So I asked Milton on Sam Outhouse if it would be possible to get permission from him to take his Tigercats and basically modernize them for P3D version 4 and version 5. So with that, I took a lot of that stuff from the already converted military versions, and I just kind of brought it to the tanker versions and adjusted some things and basically merged a lot of that stuff that was done for the military P3D versions and brought them to the tankers. And then, I don't know if you've been able to kind of maybe tell, but I've added PBR to these as well. So now the Tigercats have PBR along with all of those, all of the interior pieces and things like that that were all brought up to, P3D standards essentially. So along with kind of what I did with the Electra package, is I'm also modernizing the way that the texture layouts are. I'm updating the textures. They're all now 4K textures. I've also trying to cut down the file sizes as well, because with 4K, obviously, it brings the file sizes quite a bit from these were, only 1024 by 1024, and you're basically quadrupling the detail size of the texture whenever you level them up to 4K. So it's obviously the file sizes are going to be bigger. So keeping the files cleaned up and a little bit more organized makes for it being not a gargantuan package to have to deal with whenever you try to download it. So that I'm also doing with these. I've also done some lighting changes for the lights. The lights are now hard-coded into the model itself. Let's see what else. So we have here the drop doors on the retardant tank are functional. They're tied to the spoiler key, I believe. I made them to. The military versions have folding wings. Now, the tanker versions, you could fold them, and from what I understood, though, that they took the pneumatics out of the wings to actually do it, and they had to manually fold them. So I have fixed the wings on this for that. Also, because of the way the assignments are for Firefighter X, people using Firefighter X with this, if you leave the wing folding or some of the other assignments not fixed, they'll move whenever you go to fill the aircraft in Firefighter X. So some of those things I've had to fix them, or they just didn't import over well to the P3D version. So those are fixed for that. The wings are actually fixed. The tailhook, I think, still works. I have to double check that, but tailhook still works. Not that anyone's going to be using the tailhook probably, but all the animations have been updated. Cowl flaps, and things like that. So that all went over well. As far as details and things like that, I still had the minor stuff to do towards the end. My main concern was getting them moved over completely to the P3D standards with PBR and all that stuff, and then we can move into, like I said, the finer details of things that I need to add to the all the libraries that I added. And that kind of brings me to the last point. Originally, the tanker versions that were released for FS 2004 were done by Jeremy, our other developer in SATO, and he's the guy that's working on the S2T project for Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020. He did the textures for the tanker version, so he did a version for Siskiyou and a version for TBM. So I've added an additional several libraries for each operator. Now, I tried to find the operators that operated them, and so that was like Siskiyou, CalNat, TBM, and SV Flying Service. Those are the operators that are included in this pack. Each operator, like I said, has 2 libraries associated with them, so some of them are just a variation of their library, and some of them were slightly different, because during this time period, a lot of operators, they had several libraries across their entire fleet of aircraft that they had. Some of them were standardized, some of them weren't, but that's kind of what made it interesting, is that you just knew that because the brand or the company logos were on the side of the airplane, but some of them looked all completely different than their entire fleet. And that's what made it, like I said, the variation interesting to see. So I try to do, like I said, create some variation with them in that respect. So there's, I think, 8. So there's 8 liveries now across the board for these. Um, I'm debating on whether or not to include the paint kit for them, because I did kind of create a pseudo paint kit to be used. So I might also include that with the release. I'm not 100% sure. I might release that on its own. Um, but a lot of things goes to Milton. He's a very nice guy. I've only directly interacted with him for this project, and he seems like a really nice guy. And he's actually taken a step back from modeling and things like that, but he is around on Sim Outhouse and will respond a lot of times if you ask him questions and things like that. And a lot of his tutorials are actually what got me started on aircraft conversions for tankers. Granted, I'm not good enough to model an entire aircraft from scratch, but adding tanks to things and making minor fuselage changes and things like that is kind of where my my specialties lie at the moment. So, but he's kind of one of those people that his putting out his modeling tutorials and things like that about GMAX and some of this other stuff is kind of what got me started on my path towards looking at stuff and trying to tweak stuff that I wanted to do and stuff like that. So it's kind of cool that I'm able to. He gave me permission to be able to do this stuff to his aircraft. Granted, the work was pretty much already done by him. I'm just updating it. So no real conversion work I had to do with these, like in terms of like modifying the models or anything like that. I was just basically adding PBR and removing stuff from military versions and stuff like that to put all together so that it all meshed well. So with how this is going, this project is a lot faster than some of these other ones because, like I said, most of that hard work was already done by Milton from the get-go. So these shouldn't take long to come out. I'm already in some of the phases of the flight testing on my own personal end. The next phase, I'll probably do a very, very short, limited beta test like I have been doing with a lot of these conversions just to make sure that there's nothing missing and stuff like that. So I'm guessing the Tigercats will probably be released probably at the middle or maybe even the end of this month, February. But I think that's pretty much all I had to talk about with the Tigercats for now. And I've got some other stuff that I'm going to be working on, but nothing that I can really talk about quite yet. So we'll just kind of go from there. Thanks for stopping by and tune into the next one.